And welcome to NA Lit Chat, everyone. Apologize for being a little bit late tonight. We've had some technical difficulties we're trying to navigate. Your regular host, and I know you miss her voice, Amy, hopefully she's going to try to join us here in just a little bit. She's navigating a few things. So we are joined tonight by author, I'm told recovering CPA, Heather Sunseri, who's going to talk to us a little bit
Everybody.
Yep, there's Heather. She's going to visit with us a little bit about budget and finance. We're also got Chris Fox on here. How you doing, Chris?
Hi, I'm doing good.
All right. But tonight we're kicking off, we're going to have a whole month long, all through February, of different aspects of sort of this whole business and finance thing for authors, which I know is something that makes us all a little bit, makes a lot of us sweat, I think. But I think Heather tonight is going to help us get over a little bit of our fears, I think, try to normalize this for us as much as possible. And make it not so dreadful. But Heather, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you got going on?
Well, yeah, so like you said, I'm a recovering CPA. I actually left a career of being a CPA for 20 years just this past August, and to write full time. I've been writing kind of in my spare time for the last 4 or 5 years or so, and I published my first novel in 2013. So so I write young adult science fiction, and a book called Mind Speak is what started it all out, a trilogy that was complete last year, and it's about a group of kids who are cloned and discover they have these very unnatural abilities, and a lot of adventures there. And then I have a new series starting. Actually, I'm releasing a cover and a blurb tomorrow to my newsletter subscribers. So I've got another series coming out as well as a young adult dystopian. But yeah, so I'm a CPA, still a CPA, even though I call myself a recovering CPA, and love to talk money. It's actually probably the one thing I brought to publishing that intimidates everybody is, that business part of it. So that's kind of the fun part for me.
Which is something I can get behind. I want to ask because when I hear CPA or there are several successful authors that are attorneys. I don't initially think these are not the most creative people I stumble across in my day to day. So I want to know what brought you into the sci-fi and dystopian? Are you a TV sci-fi lover? What?
I love sci-fi movies. I mean, I was a Star Wars junkie growing up,
right.
And then as I got older, the Harry Potter, which not really sci-fi, but it's just that fantasy world. I love that part of the creation. And then the other thing is, I do tax returns. I do big, large tax returns that are a huge puzzle, and that's what writing sci-fi and creating worlds is like to me. It's it's like creating all these different elements and putting them together, and that, I don't know, that spark of creativity is what I loved about writing this genre. So,
right. Well, and it has to be a great break from. I don't want to call your work monotonous because that's.
No,
I'm perpetuating this idea that money and business are bad, but.
It is monotonous, and that part of it it was kind of an escape for me. So.
Yeah, it also is writing is quite monotonous too. It's just it's easy to feel like we're encapsulated in this huge world that we're creating, but at the same time it's just well, this is the street name of this particular town, and there's nothing interesting about that, but it's great for us. Right. So it's just a different take on that.
It is, and you still have to get from point A to point B, and part of that can be a little bit boring, just like the work I'd always been doing. So.
Right. Well, Chris, what's anything going on Twitter? Any news to share today?
Yes, quite a bit. We have Amelia TD. She says my good news is author face for alter ego Amelia Carosella, which is less good news and more flat out relief. So she basically is just doing a lot of different things all at once, which is a bit unique. I can't relate to that because I have enough trouble balancing my own self without a persona. Becca Paula, her second release, Between Everything and Us, is now out, so you can go get that at any retailer where she's selling it, probably Amazon.
Yay.
I hope so. Our one and only Cat Girl. Cat is She's doing her new novella, Beautiful Stranger. It just hit number 13 on Amazon's new adult fantasy bestseller list today.
Woohoo!
Yay!
That's awesome.
I
Kat.
didn't know there was a new adult fantasy bestseller list, so that's news to me too.
There
So
is,
good
man.
news.
Huge progress in new adult the last
Very
year or
good.
so. New categories.
And we have February Grace, who says, I'm still mostly down with health issues, but I'm trying to
Boo.
hang in tonight. And she still has news, but I'm trying to read it. Upon a Time has just passed 330,000 reads on Wattpad and will be released
Woohoo.
by Book Trope soon. So the next book is going into editing right now.
That's awesome, February. That's such good news. Wattpad's a cool little resource out there. I think I saw St. Bende, who's out, one of our staff out on Twitter tonight, as is LK Lewis and Catgirl. I saw St. asking people about Wattpad tips, and I will say our Twitter audience is a fantastic resource for that. We have several people in our Twitter audience that rock Wattpad, so definitely hit them up. So Heather, I don't know if you've done much in the way of like counseling people through all this stuff, but so let's just say there's this guy, his name may or may not be EJ, that has a little bit of fear of numbers, and not just me, and not liking math or like just that kind of thing. But there are a lot of authors that feel like you have to sort of sacrifice a part of your creative spirit to invest in the bit, like to believe in the business aspect of it, to have to do that. What would you say to those people? Do you have anything you could say to those people that could get them to look at this differently rather than just it's all numbers and figures and
Yeah, it's such a common thing when you're creative. It's so difficult to grasp and embrace the money part of it and the finance part of it and the numbers part of it. And you really, to get past that, I think you have to talk to people who know maybe a little bit more than you do about it. I watched this great video last week. The lady who developed Spanx, she is this incredible entrepreneur. She developed this thing, she became creative and developed this thing that everyone needed and has built this multi-billionaire company, and all from her own finances. She's not public yet, or she wasn't at the time I watched this video. And one of the things she said in this video was hire your weaknesses. And if you are intimidated by money part of it, you need to talk to people who aren't as intimidated about it, and doing chats like this, with people who aren't as intimidated by it and listening to their advice. And if you start making money and need more advice, you need to hire that person. And don't be afraid to do that, because there are people out there. You don't have to pay big bucks to get people to help you with the finance part of it.
Right. So, do the thing, and we've had this discussion about book covers before, that if you're not good at book covers, have somebody do them for you.
Absolutely.
It'll take a lot of the pain out of this process for you. Amy, are you back live with us?
I don't know. You tell me, EJ.
Yay!
You're there!
We've got our hostess back.
But I will need the outline.
Yeah, I'll reshare it.
We'll get that in a second.
We were just visiting with Heather about how to sort of normalize, make people comfortable with this finance process. One thing she just mentioned was, if you just hate it that much, then try to, find somebody to help you through that. So, which I think is an excellent tip.
Yeah, I heard her say hire your weaknesses, and I think that we often talk about the fun stuff when it comes to book publishing and hiring our weaknesses. We talk about cover reveals or blog tours or editing, and that comes a little bit more obviously with the business of book publishing. But money is a big weakness for a lot of us, especially for those of us who maybe have never run our own business before, or might have a day job that just like, that's not part of what you have to know, and it's a whole new world. I always felt very fortunate when I got into this. I was given the advice to look at it like a small business, and I had already owned my own business, and it resonated with me really a lot. In fact, I think you and I talked about this when we met in Queen City, but I felt like that advice was invaluable, and that mindset from the start was so valuable.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to, even if you're, it doesn't matter if you're traditional or indie published, you have to look at this as a business, because no one's going to look after your assets and your money like you will. So you have to learn some of those things. And if you don't know it already, find somebody who does that you trust.
Well, and I think that there are a lot of big business questions that I know EJ got when he started researching, what people wanted to know from you today. But I think that the quintessential thing that I've heard from a lot of people, and maybe you've heard it too, is that when you're not making a lot of money in the beginning, this can feel like something that it's not really worth it to keep track of. You're like, oh, okay, I got $60 from Amazon this month. Woohoo! Like, I'm not saying $60 isn't a lot of money, because it is, but it only becomes a lot of money if you start treating it that. It's kind of like it's a consciousness thing. If you're not looking after it, and if you're not starting to think that it's a business and that it's making money and that every dollar matters, it's never going to get there.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. The first year I went to a major conference and spent, I don't know, $600,000, something like that. That was lucky enough to get to go. I still tracked that, even though I had no income coming in. I still tracked that, and I took a deduction on my tax return for it. I took a loss that year, and the reason I did is because I knew I was in this to make income, and I had faith that it would happen in the next year or two. So I went on and started tracking that, and I took a loss for it because it's business expense. If you're investing in yourself, it's business expense.
Absolutely. So being mindful of keeping track of those things, big things like conferences that are really expensive, and small things. I think Lindsay Lewis, who's she's on our team here at NA Lit Chat, and she's in Twitter tonight, and she was saying, if you get an idea and you buy a pen and a new notebook, like, that's deductible. It's
Absolutely.
part of your writing. And there's big things and there's small things, but I think it's also about, there's a bigger mindset to that, which is, how am I going to do this, and is it going to take any money, and do I have the finances to commit to that right now? And I think I hear people discussing that a lot when it comes to like conferences and events, and that makes total sense, because you can look at that and say, gosh, maybe the Romantic Times convention is X dollars and the hotel is Y dollars and the plane ticket's going to be this. I don't know if I can afford that. But just putting out a book, people have done it for nothing. You hear those stories about people that put together their own cover. They spent, no money. They got a free, I don't know, they like made some weird font, put it on a book cover, and had their best friend edit it, and all of a sudden they sold a ton.
Yeah.
But you don't hear that much anymore, So even just considering what the minimum might be to publish a book, I mean, what do you think people should really be thinking about from the very start, beyond everything is tax deductible? Like, what are the key things to start thinking about?
I would think, I guess the key things that I think about, I go for my day-to-day operations. I think about things like mileage. If I'm attending meetings with my writer group here in Kentucky, I think I'm thinking of outside the box, little things that people don't remember to include is things like the mileage. Things about if you have coffee. I had lunch with my husband last week. He does my covers. I don't pay him to do my covers, but we had lunch to discuss the fonts used on the cover and how I wanted to change it. I deduct that lunch because, that was definitely a business meal. That wasn't fun. Actually, it was fun. I like discussing covers. But I start, anything that goes toward the profit of your business is deductible and is an expense you should be tracking.
Now, as a CPA, are you sort of obligated to tell some of our friends who maybe haven't dealt with deductions and business deductions before, they're not all deducted equally? It's not always a dollar for dollar deduction, right?
Correct. Like meals and entertainment, anytime I deduct a lunch or coffee, that's 50%. You deduct meals at 50%.
But it's still better than not deducting it.
Absolutely, yes. And mileage, you got to be careful. There are a lot of people who try to deduct. Once they start making money, they want to deduct a vehicle. Well, writers don't drive anywhere. You're not going to deduct a vehicle. You're not going to get that past most CPAs. But you are going to be able to deduct anytime you drive somewhere. It's a percentage thing. Take your phone, for example. A lot of my phone is used for writing for whatever reason, whether it's doing research while I'm sitting in the carpool line or, using my phone for conversations, I'm deducting a percentage of that phone. And you have to be comfortable with what percentage that you are going to deduct against your business.
And would you advise, okay, so I feel like, when EJ talked about the outline for tonight, there's people at all different levels of this. There's people who, haven't really started to publish yet. Maybe they're not seeing this as a business yet, but now they're starting to think of things that they should be deducting. Then there are people who have maybe already published a couple books and are maybe thinking, is it time to start a company? What are how do you get yourself from point A to point B there? Do you suggest just starting to track your expenses? Do you suggest getting a separate credit card or a separate bank account to start?
I would definitely suggest a separate bank account, especially if you're starting to get any kind of income in. If you're just writing checks for expenses, maybe not yet. Credit card, I'm pretty good at tracking my expenses, so I don't get a separate credit card, but I have QuickBooks, so I track those kinds of things. I think if you're just starting out, the most important thing is if you're just starting out and you actually have income, I would put that in another bank account and I would start tracking things there, because that way it's in one place.
Yeah, so it's more about separating it from your actual the rest of your money, so you just don't confuse it later.
Yeah. You just don't confuse it. And if you do hire an accountant, then it's easy to say, here is all of the stuff related to my book endeavors. So I definitely go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I just definitely recommend the separating it and keeping, just a manila folder. Stick a manila folder in a drawer, and anytime you have a receipt, throw it in there. And just keeping it separate from all the other things you're doing.
Yeah, it's a good point, because I would say I've never differentiated that. It all just kind of goes into my bank account, and in the long term, I haven't made a whole lot of money from writing because I haven't written a whole lot, but I have made some, and it's in there somewhere, but I couldn't point it to you and be like, that's what I earned. So yeah, it's definitely if it was all in one place, it's much more tangible in that way.
Absolutely. And then you start looking at the ways to grow that. If you're keeping separate track of that, it becomes a business. And you start looking.
Like a sandcastle. If you imagine a sandcastle, you can imagine whatever you want, but when you're actually building it, you need to kind of plan it out so you just don't step on it all the time.
Absolutely.
I like that analogy, Chris. That's awesome. But I think that we have a family business, and my husband is a photographer. So.
Oh, my husband is too.
Oh, that's awesome. There's a lot of photography writer combinations that I've met through the years. It must somehow work. And he has a business that, it's creeping on 10 years. There are already accountants and bookkeepers involved, and he does also do books. Mm-hmm. So up until this year, we've sort of, and I work for the business, so it's been, sort of well, we already have this in place, so let's just use this facility to make it work. And I'm getting to the point where it's well, that's awesome, but I probably should be doing what you're talking about just for the sake of okay, well, I made X dollars this month, let's reinvest it. That's certainly what we did, at the beginning of the photography business. So,
right.
And starting to think about, when I first started doing this, I had a consulting job that came directly from writing books. So I was able to look at that money and say, well, this is, this can help sort of feed this beast a little bit, and it allowed me to hire my editors and my cover designers, but I've made that investment. So now it's time to sort of start keeping track of what's coming in and budgeting and thinking it through. I know that as long as it's sort of mixed up with his stuff, it's never going to quite pop the way I need it to.
Absolutely.
Because I'm not going to be thinking about it the way I need to.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing when I was still working in public accounting just last year, I'd released 2 books at that point. I had already separated everything because I wanted to be able to see that growth, and I didn't touch the money that I was getting from my books because I wanted to save in order to quit that day job. And if I hadn't separated that would have easily gone into our daily finances. And separating it just really paints the picture for you, even if it's small.
I feel like this is key advice for everybody out there that was saying like, oh, the dream is to, quit the day job and write full time.
Yes.
That's got to be step one for everybody because like you
Absolutely.
said, if you can't see it, you can't get there.
Yeah, if it's not something tangible in front of you, you'll never believe it exists. And you just have to put that in some type. I mean, even if some people can get away with keeping it in their same account, and that's fine. But then do a spreadsheet or something that shows you what it is.
Yeah, like a tangible thing you can point to and say, I earned this much money.
Yes. I've sold this many books, and it has netted me this much money, and I've had these expenses. Therefore, I have this much money that is coming from that business right now.
Well, and that's my New Year's resolution for the business, and I know it's the same for a lot of people because, if this isn't your full-time job, for some people it's still money that their family really counts on one way or another. So they might not have the luxury of not being able to touch it, but it's still about knowing exactly where it comes from. So one way or another, you got to keep track of that. I've heard people who say that they use PayPal for that. And they get the PayPal bank card, and that's got like a Visa logo, and it allows them to sort of like take payments for things either on their website or at events, and then keep track of it. Now, that doesn't really help you with getting paid by the vendors necessarily. You still need, I think, a more traditional bank account for that, unless you're...
I actually think you can set your vendors to pay through your PayPal, but I do not recommend it.
Okay.
I actually know somebody who has done that, and that is not. It's just very difficult to reconcile, and you want it to go into an account that you can verify is correct.
Yeah, the simplicity is just going to make everything easier for you. One
Absolutely.
thing I would recommend, like was mentioned, a spreadsheet is nice because it's not associated with anything. It's just a piece of thing on the computer, and you can just type stuff in whenever you want.
Right.
Similar to that is mint.com, that is mint.com. It basically just catalogs everything that passes in and out of your bank account for you, and it does all the hard work. So if you wanted to sort by all your profits or all your expenses, you can just sort all that automatically, and it's really nice.
Right.
Hey, EJ, what's everybody talking about as far as like where are they in this part of getting to know their author finances?
It's kind of all over the place. So our Cat Girl studio, Cat in the audience, so she has a design business too. So she comes from a little different place in it. But I just had to laugh because I loved what Heather said about the whole desk drawer thing, because Cat's like, I totally have a desk drawer that I put all my receipts in. And she says all of her paper receipts and then an email folder for her digital receipts. And I think that just really highlights how easy this can be. Like, it doesn't have to, you don't have to have some like advanced accounting system, you don't have to have a, graph-based Excel spreadsheet, that runs everything. Like, this could be literally simple as having that little nail and a board and stabbing your receipts on it, and
Absolutely.
keeping track of it that way.
And I know for us, for our business, I mean, we have one business credit card, and that's all we use. So if it's on there, it's a business expense. Again, it doesn't mean that we're going to get the whole deduction, but, whatever I'm buying that is supporting either the writing or the photography business is coming off of that one credit card, so that at least it's all on one account.
Yes.
Well, and the Gray Idris, this is by contrast, says, I honestly hadn't, because I asked how are you keeping track of your expenses and your expenditures and income, and she said, I honestly hadn't thought about it. I'm going to start doing that now. So I was like, and honestly, I think I just think it's exactly what you guys were talking about, the mindset of starting out and saying, I want to make money at this, like I want to do that. And that's why this is an important step, because you develop good habits along the way as you go. I had to share this our resident funny man, Michael Simcoe, about the Spanx conversation here. He said, I think I just learned from audio that everyone needs Spanx, so where do I get a pair? Michael, you could tweet me a picture of you in Spanx, dude.
I'll pay you money for it. You can
Spanx for men now. I did hear that last.
Oh my Lord! You're just Spanx for men. Quit drinking beer.
And I think you can make the excuse that they're good for like lower back support.
No, I meant to say that earlier. We were doing stuff, but I've seen the lady. She's very popular. You can go online on YouTube, and she is a wonder. Like the lady that started this
Oh yeah, she just cut up some pantyhose because she
amazing.
needed something.
She's a mogul now. Like she's,
And
she's
you
amazing.
know what's funny is almost everyone I know is like, dude, I cut the feet off a pair of pantyhose once. Like we've all done that, and it's really an example of how sometimes, some obvious things when they're done well by the right person can be knocked out of the park. And I think that that's like a glimmer of inspiration that we all need to hold on to as writers as well, because, does the world need another love story? I don't know, but this week you get some new people that hit the New York Times bestseller list, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I guess we did need that one more love story. Everybody's got one, but somebody who does it right can really get, that combination of timing and luck and success. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, it's about to be February. That's when most people who might not have a complicated tax situation start thinking about it for the first time, especially here in the U.S. It might be a different timeline for other countries. But if you're like the Gray Idris and you haven't started thinking about it at all, what can you do right now? And what should you be doing right now for the 2014 tax year? Is it too late? Should you just start focusing on 2015? Or are there things that you might want to pull out and pay attention to, and that you could maybe even deduct for this year's taxes?
The first thing I would do, of course, there's things that are just apparent that you need to look at your income and all the expenses we've talked about already. But then think about the things that might not be a receipt in a file, things like phone, mileage, anything you could depreciate. Did you buy a new computer this year? Did you buy an iPad that you're using for your business? Anything that you've got to remember that some of those things might not be 100% deductible, but start thinking about the things that maybe didn't hit that receipt pile.
So let's go for a concrete example. My keyboard broke earlier in the year. I can't write without a keyboard. That kind of sucks. So I bought a new keyboard. What could I do with this new keyboard that I have as a tax deduction?
It's how much was the keyboard?
I would just say, let's say it was $60.
Deductible, 100%.
And it's just that easy.
Let me say that. Let me rephrase that. Maybe not 100%. Depends on how many things you use it for.
I get you. So basically, is there anything else that I would have to do besides just talking to a tax person and saying, hey, this is the thing with my business, I want to deduct this?
Right, no. I mean, it's a deductible expense. Add it to your list.
That's awesome. So it's just that simple.
So start thinking of all the things that maybe, but I think the thing to remember is that if you haven't been preparing for this in advance, you don't want to drive yourself crazy. What if you're the kind of person that just does like TurboTax, you get a W-2 from your regular job, you weren't planning on doing much this year besides what you do every year, you go and you plug your numbers. Is there a way, is it worth it to deduct these little expenses, or is it still the $9,000 number, or?
What do you mean the $9,000?
I thought there was like a $9,000 blanket deduction that you could take, and that you only started tracking things if you were over that, or am I just totally making that up?
I don't know. I'm not sure what that is, but I think that you really want to be careful not to deduct more than what you spent on your business.
There's some sort of blanket deduction that has something. Just ignore me. So basically, if you go into TurboTax and you've got your W-2 from your regular job, and then you have.
You're talking about like a standard deduction.
I am. I'm talking about a standard deduction and how that works, and at what point you want to be in to decide it's worth taking the time to go above and beyond that.
Okay. Well, the standard deduction, I don't know how much it is this year. It's different for individual and married filing joint. But beyond that is if you had mortgage interest or charitable deductions and taxes, those kinds of things. Once those go above that standard deduction, that's when you take more there.
Okay.
So that's really separate from the actual business.
Okay. So basically, any and all business deductions are viable for, however much you can add them up for.
Yes.
And then how if you're doing your own taxes, are you responsible for coming up with that 50% number for arts and entertainment, or is that a place you wouldn't even start to deduct if you didn't really know what you were doing or were working with an accountant or a CPA? Should you steer clear of that and stick with hard cost
No,
items?
I would still come up with that number, and there's a line item on. Now this is, it gets a little bit more complicated when you're actually doing your taxes. We're talking about sole proprietors right now, so it's a Schedule C on your individual tax return. It's it's a line item on page 1 of a 1040. Some people, and I know this was a question that was asked at some point. Some people will decide to do a different type of business, but for simplicity right now, I'm just talking about, you have a W-2 and you've got some business expenses and you're putting it on your individual tax return.
Yeah, I think that's where most of the people are in our audience tonight, and I think that's where we're going to do another show this month about when is it time to take the next step in becoming a business. So
gotcha. So I'm talking about just a simple business, and anything is deductible if it's related to your profit motive on your tax return.
So go through, think about all the things that maybe you can track down a receipt for that you don't have, and if you're not already doing it, gather them up.
And go through your checking account. Go through your checking account and go through your credit card statements. It'll jog your memory on things that were actually business related.
Okay, so we've got some questions. We're talking about write-offs. So beyond education, meals and entertainment, tangible goods that support your writing, and mileage, are we missing any big ones?
Let's see. Well, of course, you're editing and
book hard costs for books.
Yeah,
and marketing, I would say.
I had a question about write-offs. So the idea of writing off your home office space is tricky because you have to get the percentages of what are you using it for, personal use, whatever. If you've got an old couch in there or something like that, that can ding you on it because they can say you're using it for living space and not an office and whatever. And but how is it worth it? I always never do that because I always want to do it, and then I have to start figuring out what 1/50th of my electric bill is. I'm just it's not worth it. I don't think the deduction would be worth it.
The home office deduction is a great deduction if you meet the criteria, and that criteria has actually changed recently, and I can't speak to exactly how it changed. In the past, you've had to have a very distinct part of your home that was devoted only to business, and a lot of people don't hit that criteria. I think it has changed a little bit. There is a wonderful, I know people are intimidated by the IRS website, but there are wonderful publications on the IRS website. If you search for the deduction you're talking about, it will give you complete guidelines on that, and it's not as intimidating as it sounds. But the home office is one of those. They have a whole outline on the IRS website that will tell you exactly how to do it and tell you what to. I think it's a completely worth it deduction. You can deduct things that you wouldn't have thought of.
And inform me if I'm wrong, but if you go to a tax person, they should know all this stuff and help you
Absolutely,
do it, right?
yes.
So yeah, if you already have a tax person, just talk to them. They know what they're doing.
Yes. And they're going to know your situation better.
One thing that my tax person has us do is that we won't try to do 1/50 of our electric bill or whatever, because we had a home office separate entrance and we just moved, so now we just kind of have a different floor. But they'll have us pay our electric bill out of the business a quarter of the year. So that's kind of a blanket way of making it a little bit easier on yourself. Mm-hmm. If you can sort of come up with a conservative estimation like that, it might be helpful. But that's, of course, only if you've already have a separate account that you're paying things from. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, there are things that may or may not be, a good use of your time if you're doing this on your own, and maybe that's your goal for next year. Mm-hmm. Is to start paying attention or to start being more careful or to get a tax consultant to help you, from the beginning, kind of a thing.
One of the things I always tell people is, and I can sit here and give advice all day long, but having a tax professional while not always the thing you want to do, they will know your unique situation. And a lot of the advice I can give is general because I don't know a unique situation. If you've got a spouse, they've got a whole nother set of circumstances they're bringing to the table. So, but yeah, home office is definitely one of those items that is better to talk to a professional about.
And I wanted to throw this out just because it was pertinent to what we're talking right now. It's a question from Amalia on Twitter that she just posted. Do you need a tax person who's familiar specifically with author expenses and like our business in general, or do the things that apply to just small business, are they going to kind of apply to us as well?
I don't think you need a tax person is going to be able to handle an author pretty easily.
I've noticed there's a difference between tax people that are experienced with freelancers and those that are not. So
yes, there's definitely some unique items to a freelancer and to an author but they should be able to easily look that up.
But that's essentially how we get paid. We get paid, we get 1099s from corporations that we work with, and you may even be in a... How does that work? Do you issue 1099s if you're a sole proprietor or no?
Do you issue them for expenses you've had?
Let's just say that you've paid an editor, $1,200 this year for a series.
You need to issue a 1099.
Okay, so that's another thing that we should really be talking about when it comes to these expenses. If you have big ticket items that you've hired other people to do, and you want to take the deduction, then you have to protect yourself.
Yes, if it's over $600, and if it's a non-corporation, they need a 1099. If it's a service, if you paid over $600 for a service, then it needs a 1099. So editor or your cover art, if it's over $600, has to have a 1099.
Another question we got was, more seriously, what can you deduct? So if they say went to travel somewhere to research for a story, does that count as a deduction? What else, like strange things, could possibly count for a deduction?
Travel is very tricky, and I couldn't speak on that except for if I had a specific case. Foreign travel has very strict requirements, and again, the IRS has a wonderful publication that addresses that, and they are very specific about what you can deduct when you travel. And it has to be a certain percentage of the traveling has to be business before they'll consider any part of it deductible. So, and I'm throwing this out there, this is a completely wrong percentage, but say 50% of your a week-long trip was business and 50% was personal, most likely, almost none of that is going to be deductible. So you really need to look at that's a very tricky area in the tax law.
So I'm going to bring this up because Heather and I were talking about it before we got on air about Utopia, conferences and things like that going. So I'm planning on going to Utopia in Nashville here this summer. That's pretty well the only reason I'm going is to go to this conference and do book things, how much is that? Can you deduct your plane ticket? Can you deduct?
Yeah, plane ticket, or if you drive, any expenses attributed to that. 50% of your meals.
Okay, so half the meals.
Hotel, the conference fees.
That's not so nebulous, EJ, because you're very clearly going to.
Right.
Heather's going to be there too if you guys haven't already figured that out.
Yeah, we were talking about that, chatting about, and the reason I asked too is I know we have a lot of people in our audience that are also going to that conference, along with other conferences. Kat goes to a bunch of stuff every year, and so it's just interesting. My question though is this: so if I have an aunt and uncle, let's just say, that live in the area, and I decide to stay longer than the conference, like I do my conference, I stay in a hotel, and then I leave the hotel and I go stay with them for a couple of days or whatever. But I don't deduct anything from that time period.
Correct.
Does that still count as like business pleasure, or?
It does, and that's one of those areas where I would caution you to look at the percentages that the IRS says, just so that you'll know. Now, to me, that is still a business trip, and so I'm going to look at the tax law and I'm going to decide, this is a business trip, and I just happen to tack on a couple of days personal. I will separate those days.
And that's what I was wondering if you could do that, because, I mean,
Yes.
it's definitely, I wouldn't be going if not for this conference, but I
Mhm.
just happen to know a few people that live in the area, and, like, I'm not going to be deducting dinners with aunt and uncles, you know, that kind of thing or whatever. But
And I think there's a rule that if, again, it's the percentages, and I
Right.
think there's a rule that if you go over the percentage and so more of it's personal than you intended, what happens is it makes the second part of your airline ticket not deductible or something like that. So they've got very specific rules.
Right.
And, so if you make any part of it personal, that's just the kind of thing you're going to want to look at.
So, real quick question that we got from AnnGirl38 is, what's the benefit of PayPal versus check payments?
PayPal versus check payments.
Yeah, so as we said, we could possibly get it like through, we could receive our payments through PayPal, but what would be the difference between receiving it through PayPal versus through check payments in terms of taxes and whatnot?
Is she talking about giving or receiving?
That is a good question. That was not specified. So
You're talking about receiving. I mean, PayPal's not really your bank account. I would want my receiving to go straight into my bank account because I have more control over it. Whereas PayPal, you'd have to request that money to be able to use it, unless you just continue to use it by paying things through PayPal.
That's kind of what I do. I keep some money in there, and then
Yes.
I go under it.
And I got a reimbursement last week that's in there, you know, from something, and so I've been using it to pay for things, and it just gets a little messy. So I have to figure out, okay, how am I supposed to, you know, how do I put that into my QuickBooks? So that's the only thing. It just gets a little bit messy and hard to track for me.
But paying for things is no different than any other way that gives you like a...
Right, because it just either goes to your checking account or your credit card.
It matters more that you like keep a log of it one way or another, or you know where to go look for your receipts. So we've got we started a minutes late, and I apologize. I was having some
that's okay.
technical difficulties, but you know, are there some things that you see or hear authors are doing that you'd love to be able to tell us not to?
Well, we talk about deductions a lot. There's a lot of people who have this mindset that they can deduct certain things like dry cleaning and what was the other one I thought of earlier today? I was
like
making
clothing for conferences.
Yes, clothing. No, I mean, none of that stuff's deductible. The only time clothing or dry cleaning or anything's deductible is if it is required for your business. And although I'd like to say my pajamas are required for writing, you know, they're really not deductible.
Well, and that's what we look at in our house. It's like if you're buying something for a photo shoot, it's deductible. If it's for the kids, not deductible.
Right. Exactly.
And even that's a little bit dicey. So stay away from like all kinds of clothing and jewelry. And I guess jewelry. What about for prizes and giveaways and stuff? That's a fuzzy area.
I mean, that kind of thing's deductible. That to me is advertising and promotion.
Yes. Okay.
Now, I came up with my own question the other day. Is I gave away gift cards for Starbucks, and I thought, oh, well, that's meals and entertainment. Then I realized, no, that was a giveaway to promote something. So that was 100% deductible for me.
Okay, so then if you were giving away a gift certificate to Dunkin' Donuts or to wherever, that's a different category than meals and entertainment.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. So the other question that we're getting, and that it's, I know we're going to dedicate, you know, more time to this later in the month, but let's talk about some general numbers and when you might want to start thinking about those next steps of possibly starting a business, or maybe never, or, you know, what do you advise people? At what point do they start to think about, like, okay, I made these steps and I grew this much. If I take these steps, am I going to grow more, or is, you know, staying a sole proprietor the way to go? How do you recommend people start thinking about that?
Yeah, that's such a personal preference for me. I mean, I'm a sole proprietor. I have not formed an LLC. Now, forming an LLC or even incorporating can be very, it can depend on your state.
Right.
So I'm only speaking generally right now. In the state of Kentucky, there's a yearly fee to be an LLC, and I did not feel it necessary to become an LLC, so I have not yet. This is a very touchy subject, I have found, though, and if you post this on a Facebook group, you will get 1,000 different answers of why people have incorporated or formed an LLC for one reason or another.
So I think the answer is go find out what the hard costs are.
Yes, find out what the hard costs are. Find out what your state requires. There are some states that most states recognize an LLC now, but every state has some different rules, and especially with corporations. And some LLCs have to be taxed as corporations, so it gets very complicated very quickly.
Well, and the other thing to remember is that when you talk about an LLC or a corporation, you're not just talking about the initial startup costs, because every year you have to file a tax return for that business. And that is always going to be more complicated. I don't know many people, there are probably some, but I don't know many people who, once they take that step, do their own tax returns anymore.
Correct. I don't know anyone. I mean, if obviously I do, because I know I've done this for a living, but if I were advising people to form an LLC or some kind of corporation, I'm telling you to go get hire somebody, because that gets very complicated very quickly, and just filling out those forms is complicated.
Talking about going back to the thing that we said at the beginning of hiring out your strength or your weaknesses, I mean, that is, unless you've been, unless you've done what Heather's done, or unless you are, a kind of serial entrepreneur or have had the privilege of owning your own business before and really have experience with that, definitely get help with it. And I definitely think in that case, you do want someone who maybe doesn't have experience with authors, but when you're getting a small business accountant, they need to not just be, like, we had a small business accountant, but that small business accountant dealt with businesses that made, $100,000 a year, and $100 million a year is still kind of considered a small business accountant in certain places.
Right.
Those guys didn't know what to do with us. We're like, we've got $5 in cab receipts,
I think
now you're talking Chris and I's game. $5.
Exactly.
Well, but you know what I mean. So you really want to find out. I mean, that's a good place. I wouldn't go to your author community and ask them whether or not it's time for you to become an LLC, but you might want to ask them who they use if they are one.
And I think like a big, like a good line to say this is where I should start an actual business or I should be a sole proprietor would be like, how profitable are you in your personal space? Do you feel like you're making just a ton of money? Because if you're making thousands of dollars, you could probably do something about it. But if you're just like me, who sells a book once in a while, and I'm not super popular or anything, I can get by with just being like, yeah, I sold like 5 books this year. It's okay.
Well, and then I think, what are the benefits if you want to take that next step? What would it do for you, Heather? That's probably important for people to know if they want to make that part of their plan or their goals.
Well, and that's where people get very opinionated about it. Obviously, if I'm still a sole proprietor, I haven't found that it does all that much for me yet.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who agree with you, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends who've either formed an LLC or have decided to be an S corp, or let's get really complicated, they formed an LLC to be taxed as an S corp, and that the only benefit of that is you skip out on a little bit of self-employment tax, and so now I know everyone's glossed over at this point because that gets very complicated, and it's a risk to start looking for like loopholes in the tax law, and start taking advantage of these loopholes. And when you start doing that, people don't no longer know what they're doing if they haven't been doing this for a living, and you start making mistakes. My advice is keep it simple until you're ready to get complicated.
Well, and I think once you're trying to hire people, maybe if you're at the point where you're taking on like significant part-time employees or full-time employees, or you're earning enough money that you could consider like getting benefits or something through the corporation, or through the amount of money that you're making, then obviously then it's time.
That's when it's time to actually sit down and talk to a professional about all the different things you can do. And some of these questions, when you start, how much is enough? Well, that depends on you, and it depends on your tax situation with your whole family unit. And there will be a time where I will have to sit down with a professional, because there are certain areas of it, like retirement type areas, that I don't know enough about. So I will sit down with a professional, and I'll have to analyze all the different options, because there's just so much.
So I think you probably already answered this in some way, but just to clarify, is it possible to overthink this? Like, can you outthink yourself on this stuff? Like,
yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's I forget who said it. It's like an old military saying, "Keep it simple, stupid."
Yeah.
You can outsmart yourself. Sometimes it's just about going back to the drawer and throwing your receipts in a pile, and taking a shoebox to your accountant at the end of the year and say, "Do something with this."
Well, and I think that that's what a lot of people do. But I think that my takeaway from this tonight, and I think what we can offer as we start to think about the next parts of this discussion, which are going to be about like how to sort of start to look ahead and plan your income and budget for things, and how to be realistic in the amount of money you spend on your projects, and when to decide, hey, maybe this is the book I do exclusive stock photo for, and maybe this is the book where something that I can get off of one of the sites is fine, and I'm gonna get it tweaked so that it's unique, or whatever. We all have a million of those decisions to make when it comes to publishing, and there are ways to help use your numbers, especially once you have a track record, to make those predictions and how much you should spend in advertising and marketing. But what we're really talking about tonight is, this is a business, even if you're barely making a couple bucks a month or selling a book every other day. And I think that that's a critical mindset for everybody, especially when it comes to pricing, especially when it comes to giveaways, especially when it comes to where are you spending your time. And I know this is a struggle for me. We've all talked about time on this show before, but you really have to start to think about it critically if you ever want to get there. I think that's, businesses don't grow when they're not businesses.
Yeah, if you don't value your book and your time, you're not going to make money because you put no value in it. And like the first 3 books in my series are free. They're intentional because I want people to read them, not because I want to make money off of them. It's a long-term investment. But if I do want to release more books, they're going to be priced because I want people to buy them, because I don't want to starve.
Well, and I think that's totally valid, and I think that there's a lot of proof out there of what a free first book can do, and what kind of returns you can expect on the flip side of that, and why it's of value. And Heather, I think you're even utilizing that strategy on your series at the moment, if I'm not mistaken.
What you say? What was the last part?
You have the first book in your series is free, and you get people kind of hooked and drawn in, and that's the numbers back that up. But when I first started doing this, I got some good advice that was hard to hear, and I didn't follow it for a while. And the 99-cent books are great for attracting eyeballs, but you really have to think about how long it takes that 30-cent or 33-cent royalty to add up into anything, and how much you might be spending to get, and this is not like your one-off BookBub that might bring in 7,500 readers, but think about, I had my book priced at 99 cents for a long time, and it never, I was getting like $11 a month, even though I had high sales. And then we had somebody come on a few weeks ago, and they were like, change that price. Just like, at this point, the book's been out for long enough. Like, you really don't want to, how many readers do you want to attract that are only going to read 99-cent books? And sort of starting to think about, and I was like, oh, you're right. I put the book back at $3.99. I'm definitely like not selling as much, but I actually get a check every month that's enough money to do stuff with.
Right.
Like, it might pay for a table at a event, or and that's
one of the things I start thinking about now, and because I track so much of this and track numbers, and I try not to let it intimidate me. I mean, anybody can put a spreadsheet together. If you can open it up, you can start putting numbers in cells, and I track these things so that I can decide, is free really working for me anymore?
Right. Right.
And at the end of the day, all these like deductions, all these complicated tax terms, what it really boils down to is like this is your money from your business. You're an author, and
Yes.
that's what you do. So you have to take it seriously, or else it's not going to be serious, and it's just going to be your nice little hobby.
Right. And that's okay. If that's what you want, that's okay. But we've been hearing enough from lots of you in the community to know that your dreams are bigger than that. And we used to have to rely on the publishing houses to provide for those dreams, right? You know, like you couldn't be a full-time author without a full-time author-sized contract. And now we're blessed with a lot more independence, and there's a cost associated with that.
And even more than independence, the word I like is opportunity. There is opportunity there, you know, to go and to do big things on your own, to carve out, to be a true small business.
Well, and the truth is, Heather, you would have never known that you could give up your day job if you weren't paying attention.
Yes. I mean, that was one of the biggest things that, you know, I looked at it as a business from day one. I think it was Denise Grover Swank who suggested a long time ago for everyone to do a business plan and, you know, write it down. Even if it's a pen and a piece of paper, or it can be as, you know, in a Word document, but write down what your goals are, and not just the money goals, your goals for publishing, how often you want to publish, and treat it as a business from day one, and then start tracking that, and it will become a business.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's the big takeaway from us tonight, that we're going to delve into the business of this a lot more over the next 4 weeks. We're going to talk about budgets. We're going to talk about where to spend your money, why to spend money when it comes to editing, covers, formatting, advertising, book tours, specific opportunities. But until you treat it like a business, nobody else ever will.
Right. You have to take it seriously.
So with that note, I'm going off to do my own spreadsheet. But I want to thank you, Heather Sunseri, so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Heather and I met a while back, and we started talking about this, and now she's going to be at Utopia doing a big talk on money, and we're so excited that she agreed to come and talk with us as well here, because we all need to think about this probably a lot more than we'd like to. It doesn't go seamlessly with writing, but it's obviously, you know, I'm just going to keep going, and eventually I'm going to like publish this big book, and it's going to make me $1 gazillion. I wish you all the best with that. But for the rest of us, there's, you know, a little bit more of a path that we might be able to create for ourselves. So hopefully we've given you some of those tools tonight, and we look forward to sharing more with you this month. We might have more questions for Heather as the month goes on, so hopefully you'll be receptive to those.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, and thank you, Chris Fox and EJ Wesley, for stepping in tonight. I apologize again for my computer deciding it wanted to spit Google Plus out. And
absolutely, no problem.
And thank you to St. Bende and Lindsay and Kat, who are all in Twitter, making sure the chat is fun and informational and goes smoothly. We appreciate you guys listening. We appreciate you guys tweeting. We look forward to keeping the conversation alive, and we look forward to talking to you guys again next week. This has been Amy Evans. This was NA Lit Chat, Thursday, January 29th. We will see you guys next Thursday at 9 p.m. Have a good one, everybody. Good night.